Happy Wednesday. Welcome to Seminole Sidelines. March 1st, March Madness is here. We got a great sports landscape over the next month. College basketball, men's and women's basketball. Spring football is here. The baseball team is now ranked in the top 25. Softball's off to a really good start. All the spring sports are here. But Jerry, it's March 1st. We've got to talk business of college athletics. It's one of our favorite topics. It is a sport into itself. It is a tough sport to track on a year-round basis, but we welcome in Osceola publisher Jerry Kutz, editor Bob Ferrante. This is a special Business of College Athletics edition, as we're here Monday, Wednesday, Friday on the Osceola's YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, 12:30 p.m. Eastern. And I think where we want to start here appropriately is the big news from Tuesday afternoon. Florida State announcing coaching contracts for all of their assistants. We're not going to get too deep into the weeds of all the details. Everybody was extended. Everybody, I think, with the exception of Odell Hagens, got a raise. We saw now $1 million contracts annually for Alex Atkins, Florida State's offensive coordinator, for Adam Fuller, Florida State's defensive coordinator. This is not the first time Florida State has made the $1 million commitment for an assistant. Kendall Briles in 2019 was a $1 million coordinator. But Jerry, this commitment from Florida State to keep its human capital, to keep Mike Norvell's staff intact and very happy after a 10-3 season, how important is this for Florida State?
I think it's not only important for Florida State University, but I think for our fan base too. I think the fans want to see a commitment in these assistants. They like Alex Atkins a lot. I mean, he's done a terrific job, not just as a coordinator, but as an offensive line coach. I mean, he really, turned water into wine with that offensive line. I mean, it's really amazing what he's accomplished. And he's such a young, personable guy that the players have totally bought into, that I think it makes all of our fans happy to know that Atkins has got a good contract. With Fuller, I like what I'm seeing from Fuller. I mean, Bob, you and I get to be around him more, and I think if our fans got to be around Adam, they would see what we see. I think he's a very good coach, and I think the players, he fits with Mike. It's a good combination, and so he's being rewarded. Now, obviously, the productivity has to be there, the production. But again, really a pretty terrific improvement on the defensive side of the ball, so you have to do that. Now, the other thing I was going to say about what Michael Alford did is these raises weren't extravagant. They were increased extensions of contracts only by a couple of years, and the amount of money, while it seems like a ridiculous lot of money to me, I'd love to make that money, but it's not relative to even ACC. I mean, it's in line with what Power 5 schools are paying.
Right. I think it was necessary. Alex Atkins has been in demand. There's been a number of schools that have been pursuing him. Maybe he's had more formal or informal interviews than we even realize, whether that's a college job or a pro job. So he's had opportunities. I think he's happy here. I think he understands the job that he's accomplished here. He's seen a lot of the younger linemen develop and mature under his leadership, and he can appreciate, how far this program's come. I think this was a show me year. 22 was a show me year for the coaching staff, for the players, for the program, and the reward is, well, you got it financially. You've been shown financially that reward too. Well, I think now let's go into the big topic of today's discussion.
Before we do,
go ahead. Yeah.
Before we jump there, I have another thought. There is, you mentioned with Adkins, I found it interesting that in his contract, the buyout excluded pro teams, but not college. I mean,
Right.
So if Adkins gets an offer by an NFL team, they don't have to buy him out, except for I think 15% of the remainder. Whereas with college, I mean, they're trying to lock him down against the other colleges coming in. But yeah, it's I think the thing with Adkins this year, and Mike Norvell talked about this a little bit yesterday at a luncheon that I was at for a bunch of former coaches and old guys like me. We have a lunch every week, and Alford actually came and spoke to our group the other day, and he made the point that this team has now transitioned from a coach-run team to a player-run team. That they're still there to push the leaders, but the leaders are now really taking a huge step in terms of running the tour of duty drills and in terms of holding other players accountable. And when you get to that point, which is hard work to get there, but they're there. That if you're a guy that's thinking about NFL, I mean, this is a pretty sweet spot to be when you've got your leaders in a position where they can now lead, and you're now not having to drive young kids. You got a lot of people helping you, and when you look at that offensive line last year, Adkins had that, and he'll have it again this year because there's good veteran leadership, but. Guys like Dylan Gibbons last year made his job that much easier, because of the influence he could have on the younger guys, kicking them in the butt instead of Atkins having to kick them in the butt. So I think Alex probably is happy, and he sees growth. He sees growth within the program, within his segment, within his offense, and I think he also sees the growth that the athletic department is willing to make in terms of the facilities and operational budgets to keep the coaches Alex needs to keep on his offense.
Right. I totally agree. Devontae Love-Taylor said about a year ago as he was preparing for Pro Day that he could tell the tone in that offensive line room was evolving from when he got here. Guys would arrive for a meeting 15 minutes late. There was not as much accountability within the room. That slowly changed. Not just Alex Atkins saying it, but leaders saying, guys, we got to be here early. We got to do the work. If we want to win, if we want to take this program where we think we can go, where we can be the best player that we think we can be, which Alex Atkins is trying to bring that out of us. I think that was an interesting insight just into how far the program came in a very short time. And we're seeing that incremental growth from the program.
Yeah, and now, it's like it's true in all of our lives. We can talk the good talk, but if there isn't any results, eventually people stop listening to you. And the 10-win season, the wins over Miami, Florida, LSU, I mean, that gives your leaders something to point to and say, this isn't just talk. If we do what we're supposed to do, the results will come. And that's where I think, you'd be hard pressed to find a program right now that's on a rise, on a climb any steeper than this one. I mean, I think these coaches are happy to be here, and now they're being rewarded, which is what I just talked about from a coach standpoint. You put the work in, and if you don't get rewarded, it doesn't feel too good. But they've put the work in, they've achieved a bunch, and they're being rewarded by the AD. So it's good.
Yeah, we'll get to see some.
Now we just have to pay for it. So that's where they're going to come to us. They're going to be coming to all of us fans who have season tickets, and hey, we ponied up. Now we need you to pony up. That's the nature of it.
And the good thing is Florida State has an athletic director who is always selling in Michael
Always
Alford, always selling. Well, hey, quick sidebar here.
Yeah.
Thursday morning, we'll be out there bright and early, tour of duty workouts. Jerry Kutz, Patrick Burnham, Kurt Weiler, and I will get a good chance to look at Florida State football at 6 a.m. in the morning. A little bit of an early wake-up call as we see the Seminoles doing those workouts. But Jerry, I think let's move into what Michael Alford said on Friday to the school's board of trustees. And I think you've read the comments, you've read the stories on the Osceola other sites. So I don't need to kind of rehash those comments, but I want to maybe talk a little bit about how those comments were presented to the board of trustees. It was very much a business person going in front of his coworkers or his board, his leadership, and saying $30 million short per year, looking in reverse and looking forward, does not work financially for Florida State football and all of the 20 sports at Florida State. And then I thought to myself, this is very interesting. The comments, the questions that came, but then it was the comments from Clemson's AD, Graham Neff. I want to read you this comment and get your thoughts, Jerry. This is to the Charleston Post and Courier. He said, "Is it time revenue distribution within conferences, or at least the ACC, is done differently? Yeah, I've been very active in those conversations within the league and continue to expect to take a leadership role in our desire for that to be a changed circumstance urgently." And that's an end quote. So Michael Alford did not go rogue on Friday afternoon.
No.
He had a wingman in Clemson AD Graham Neff. Your thoughts on those comments from both men?
Seemed orchestrated, didn't it?
Yes.
I mean, even in the board of trustee meeting, the questions that he was asked by the trustees and the general counsel, that wasn't an emotional outburst. That was a presentation and a statement. And listen, they didn't say anything that everybody listening to this already didn't know. There was no news, right? There was just a kind of putting a public banner in the ground, that they went public. And why would they have gone public is the question, everybody's asking. Well, for one thing, it is urgent, and it's an issue, and they need to address it, if for no other reason than to go on public record that they did address it with the board. I think it's important that, you have a responsibility to your board to bring forward that kind of information. And that's important to the university. And it's important to the board to hear it. So from a formality standpoint, it had to be said. But it tells me that they must know something, right? They must have a notion of a plan that they're pursuing and that they're optimistic about. I don't want to get anybody encouraged that means we would leave the conference, or that there would be what they call, which I hate this term, an unequal distribution. That's a bad term to be using, because nobody likes unequal. But what it really would, if you look at that chart, what he's really talking about is earned viewership. That Florida State and Clemson in football have more viewership than anybody else. And if we were to semantics and say that's earned income, if we got a portion of that money based upon the viewership that our program is bringing, then I think it's much more palatable. Now, it's still unearned. Unequal. Duke and Wake Forest are at the bottom of that football chart, and they're probably going to see it as unequal. But if you could change that terminology to earned, everybody in the league has a chance to earn it. Invest some money in your program and your branding, and put an exciting football product on the field. The same way you have in basketball at Duke and in North Carolina, and go earn it. I mean, and they're doing it in basketball. And so if we were to have an earned revenue formula for football, the shoe should fit both feet. We should have an earned revenue in basketball. Now, I know the numbers aren't the same. Basketball numbers aren't as big as football, but it. Listen, if our football program deteriorates, well, we may want to be on everybody getting the same amount, right? But I think it's important that we look at it as earned revenue and not unequal.
So when we think about earned revenue opportunities, let's talk about how a school maybe could be allocated that money. Should it be based on you're playing in a 4 million plus rating game, which Michael Alford has said that's a benchmark for the networks, and Florida State has played in a number of those between 2014 and 22. He quoted 17 times that Florida State played in those games. That includes a lot of, let's be honest, those weren't some of the best Florida State teams from 2017 through 21, but Florida State fans are still buying into the brand and still watching. So do you get extra money because you play in the 4 million plus games? Do you get extra money because you participate in the league championship game in Charlotte? Do you get extra money for some other benchmark? What?
Sure.
And we're just throwing out ideas.
Yeah.
What do you think could be on the table?
I think those things could be on the table right there. The basic formula would have you, if you did it just based on viewership, Florida State and Clemson would get $20 million a year more than they're getting right now, based upon viewership only. But Clemson Duke would lose 13 million. Wake would lose like 10 million. And that would be, untenable for their athletic budgets, right? So maybe that you couldn't sell that. Maybe that would be unrealistic. But what you just brought up is realistic. There are other things. Like if you appear in a game with ratings above this, either the conference pays you more, right, for each of those games, or maybe ESPN kicks in a certain amount more into the contract for those games. So you got to get to the negotiating table with some options that people will listen and consider. And I think all things are on the table. And, you get into bowl revenue, splits of bowl revenue. I mean, we do that with bowls. If you, depending on what bowl game you go to, I mean, it all goes into the pot and a split, but your allocation for travel is better when you're going to a better game. So it's not equal in that sense. It's unequal distribution based upon the bowl you're going to. It can happen, and I think that's what they see is that there's some wiggle room, and they just need to maximize it if they stay in the conference. Now,
right.
That's the leverage point, right? You want to talk about
leverage
that?
Is a great word. Let's get into leverage. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, what leverage does Florida State have is dependent on what the grant of rights says. Now, we've read the grant of rights. We know what it says. But the other contracts beyond that, And I think one of the things that came out of that meeting that I thought was unfortunate and misleading was that they talked about a $120 million buyout. Well, I think about everybody in the room wants to raise their hand and say, let's do it. I mean, you'd recover that in 3 years, someone on the board of trustees said. But that's not all there is to it. There's the television rights. And that's the contract none of us have seen, right, Bob?
Yeah, now reportedly, I think ESPN.com reported this a while back, saying that general counsels from a number of the league's schools were flown to Greensboro to review the grant of rights between ESPN and the ACC. Why? You have to circumvent the open records laws in Florida and a number of other states where these institutions reside. Any public institution, a contract is public record. These coaching contracts, Mike Norvell's, all the assistant coaches, the Osceola, all the news outlets, we're able to request them and get them. University of Miami, you cannot request a coaching contract or a private school. Just to give you a little bit of clarity there.
You can
But again,
request it.
you can request them. You're not going to probably get them unless the AD is friendly,
Yes.
or enjoys happy hour with you.
Yes.
So why did general counsels, again, reportedly fly to Greensboro to look at the grant of rights? One could ask that question and say they're looking to see contract language, loopholes. Is there anything favorable as far as a look in, as far as if the ACC were to add Notre Dame or another school, there might be, we think there might be an opportunity to go back to ESPN and say the ACC schools would like more money because the ACC would like to add Notre Dame, West Virginia, UConn, pick your option of potential, whether they're good or not good options in your view. It's really about, does that school potentially bring more money to the table for the current existing ACC members?
Yeah. Other than Notre Dame, I don't think there's anybody out there really that would bring a lot more value, right?
Right. I was going to ask you that too. I mean, Notre Dame likes its independence. Jim Phillips has joked about it very, very frequently. Notre Dame now with a 12-team playoff coming about, not after this season, but the 2024 season, they may not be inclined to want to join the ACC because they have a route toward a 12-team playoff. The options aren't great out there. I mean, Jerry, I'll ask you, would you take West Virginia as an option? UConn is an option. Memphis is an option. There are some schools out there, they don't feel sexy enough from a financial standpoint. They might bring football, basketball success, but do they bring you plus 42 million on a school by school basis? I don't see it. Do you see anything out there?
And I don't see any school that would, it'd be one more to divide by. When you're increasing the denominator, and so you may get less if you bring in a team that doesn't bring enough value. The per school distribution could be less. So I don't know. I just haven't seen anybody out there that really excites me on that score. I don't.
So
I mean, maybe some of our viewers do, and hit me up, Jerry Kutz at theosceola.com. I've heard a lot of arguments for West Virginia or some West Coast schools, but I don't think every time you increase that denominator, they got to bring a lot of value. Other than Notre Dame, I don't see it.
Let me throw out one more wild card, and then we'll kind of get on.
Let me back up. Unless ESPN says we want Oregon, and if a particular school would cause your network to do a look-in, then that school brings value.
Right. So the wild card in all this is what happens to the Pac-12 and their, let's call it, very underwhelming media deal that's been reported nationally by a few outlets. Some of the discussion is Apple TV might do a streaming deal. Some of the discussions are there's a smaller network called Ion that has some affiliates throughout the West Coast, not in every Pac-12 market. I can't imagine that's a deal that's going to excite athletic directors financially.
Right.
So we may see some discussions between those presidents, ADs, board of trustees, as far as what's next for them. Let's play this out. Let's just say Oregon and Washington goes Big Ten because that makes the most sense for them financially. The Big Ten will throw a good number out at those two schools. Would you take to get households in the California market? And the ACC network could say, well, hey, we get more per household in California if we have a California school.
Right.
Are you crazy enough to take Cal and Stanford as a package, or any other Pac-12 school that's remaining if I remove Oregon and Washington?
So, this was a discussion a few years back when we expanded the ACC and took in Syracuse and Boston College. They were getting that whole northeastern market. Well, Dave Hart said to me a few years ago, forget how many households there are. Tell me how many eyeballs there are. How many people in the Bay Area, San Francisco, are watching college football?
100% right.
I got a suspicion it'll be very similar percentages to what you find in Boston. Those are pro towns, and really out in California, I have my son and nephews. Actually, my nephew is a gymnast at Cal, and he still lives out there. And college sports just isn't a big deal in California. There's too many other things to compete with. The big outdoor pursuits, mountain climbing, skiing, surfing, and and then they have a big pro presence. So I think the Pac-12 conference always struggled, partly because people on the West Coast don't really watch college football like we Southerners do.
I agree. I think so too.
Yeah. So you start looking at the Big 12. Is there anybody in there that would excite you?
But they're not going to leave because they're, well, I mean, I'm thinking Big 10, Big 12. Yeah, I don't know if there's anybody attractive out of the Big 12, Oklahoma State, but the academics might not line up with what the ACC wants. Do you make a crazy grab toward an SMU just to get a Texas school?
Yeah.
Again, not the best fit, but the Texas market is big. Although same to your point, how many people are watching SMU on a weekly basis?
So I think ESPN has all those metrics. I think they know this is their business and their living, and they know exactly who they could go get that would make the ACC more attractive to them, and then you negotiate from there. But that's one part of this equation. I think you kind of have to ride two horses here, in my opinion. If you're Michael Alford and President McCullough, the one horse is, how the heck do we get out of this conference if there's an invitation from the SEC or the Big Ten? But the other thing, and I think a lot of our fans miss this point, and I don't mean that disparagingly. I think that their anger at this conference and the feeling that it can never be fixed money wise, they want out, and they're not looking at the other horse, which is, if you can't get out, how do you make the horse you're riding a faster horse? Is there a way to make this conference better? And I've often quoted Coach Bowden when he would hire an assistant, and he would say to the assistant, I know you're only coming to Florida State to get to the better job, but if you do your job here, you can make this job the better job. And I think that's what Phillips has been trying to do, and he needs an Alford and the ADs at all the other schools to work with him, to make this conference a better conference. And I'm sure that because he and Alford have a past relationship, that Michael's trying to ride two horses. Right. I would think he is. I mean, by asking for what I call an earned revenue share, that's telling me he's trying to stay here in this conference, right?
Agree.
And so that tells me he probably doesn't think there's a real good chance of getting out of this contract. And so that's where I read the tea leaves, and I do know from background, and so do you, Bob. When we've talked to Alford, he does have a tremendous respect for Jim Phillips. And the other thing I'm watching, and I know you are, is what does Phillips do? Is he going to get that Big Ten commissioner job? And that wouldn't be a good thing, I don't think.
That was his dream job. That
It
was
is
his dream job. He was Northwestern's AD for, I think, about 12 years. And yeah, he and Michael Alford go way back. They knew each other from AD circles.
Yeah.
Michael Alford having been at Central Michigan and a bunch of other schools.
I would have to think that while Phillips will never go public on it, that he's looking at that other horse too. About how do we make the ACC better? I mean, he's been doing that for several years, and he may have a bigger appetite from an earned income viewpoint, unequal distribution. That he may have an appetite for that to make this conference better. Because think about it now. Let's say you're Duke or you're Wake Forest or Boston College, the people that are down at the bottom of the viewership. If Florida State and Clemson can't compete in football, this conference is in bad trouble, right? So
Right.
if I'm one of those schools, and I'm not, and so I realize I'm biased, but I've tried to put myself in their shoes. If you take a little less, or forget that, you take the same amount, but you allow them to earn more. And those schools are successful in football, and the conference becomes better in football. It's going to benefit everybody, right? I mean, those are your lead horses. You've got to feed them. And I tell you, even Duke, you look at Duke, their they're investing some. You and I have been to their facilities at these other schools. This isn't the same ACC that when we first joined, and the visitor locker room was a tool shed. I mean, these conferences have invested a lot of money in football. So, I don't know. A good, aggressive athletic director at NC State might say, "Yeah, I like an earned income thing. I think we can get in that. I think we can. I'd like to have a shot at earning more money." And even though it may look like less initially, we're investing in football. And by God, I like an unearned, not unearned, but an earned income model. So I just can't hardly imagine 8 schools not wanting that. Because, we're all competitive. We all believe in our brands. And so I think it's got legs, and maybe that's why he was so willing to say it.
I think Jim Phillips, for all the criticism of his gated community comments last year at ACC kickoff, I was there, Kurt Weiler was there, you guys were watching on TV. It didn't come off well on TV. It didn't come off all that well in the room. The praise that I would give for Jim Phillips is, when I went back 2 years ago, did a story on him, talked to some people who worked with him at Notre Dame and other schools. He is a thinker. He is a collaborator of information. He wants to talk to ESPN, bring information to the table so that when chancellors, presidents, and ADs make a decision, they have all the information necessary. And Phillips will try to build a consensus, if he can, at the table. And that will be done after a lot of one-on-one conversations with a lot of these stakeholders. So remains to be seen. Is Phillips in it for this? Is this his primary job? Is he one eye looking at the Big Ten opportunity? If he's the ACC commissioner for the long haul, can he pull off some sort of consensus deal among the various schools? It's really going to shape his tenure as commissioner, where Swofford's was shaped through expansion and also through this grant of rights that has to some extent put the ACC behind the 8 ball financially.
Hey, can we talk about that just a second?
Sure.
Give ESPN and the SEC credit. They envisioned the SEC network years before it came about. I think they modeled it after the Longhorn Network, but they had a vision and they made it happen. And blame the SEC, the ACC all you want, but it was the SEC that was the innovator and got that contract put through. When ESPN and the ACC wanted to put together a network contract, it was going to, a network that was going to cost $1 billion to make happen. ESPN wasn't going to do that unless they could lock down Florida State and Clemson and all the other schools amid expansion talks and amid conversations that these schools were going to leave and go somewhere else. Why would ESPN invest that kind of money? Right?
Yeah, they wouldn't have. And the grant of rights initially was through 2026 when the network was created. Then the grant of rights was extended a full 10 years out to 2036. So that timeline lines up with what you're saying.
Yeah. And so when that was the reason that they came back to the schools and said, we need to lock this up in order to make $1 billion investment. Right. So and what the conference this year, the payout was how much more than last year?
I know it was $42 million in total. I'm not sure how much it grew as far as a incremental.
It grew several million this year, and Comcast was only in for half of the year. And so, is this ACC network producing more money? Yes. How much more will it produce in the future with Comcast on board year round? Among shrinking subscription base, but that's to be seen. But there was consideration there. There was a reason that the all of the presidents around the conference signed that deal, not one. All of them. And I don't like the deal. None of us like the deal, but there was a reason it was done. And so here we are. 36 is what it looks like in my mind until somebody comes back and says there's a way out of it. But
right.
And one other thing I'd say about that on the notion of consideration, and I've talked to now several judges about this, is that ACC contract does have consideration, right? That we've been talking about. Some people say, "Oh, you can break the contract because the ACC violated or there's not consideration." Well, I want to take people back 30 years ago when we first joined the ACC. I happened to be a guy who wanted to join the SEC, but be that what it may. At the time, why did FSU want to join a conference? Well, as an independent, it was getting harder and harder to schedule games as conferences were expanding. There weren't a lot of independents that you could schedule good games with. That was one reason. 2, stability of your athletic budget. back in those days, if your football team good, you feast. If your football team didn't go to a bowl game, it was famine, you know. And guys like Bob Goyne and Hootie Ingram, our ADs back at that time, they would like to be in a conference to stabilize. Every year I'm going to get this much, and it's good. We're going to feast every year compared to what we now have. And at the time, the ACC paid more than the SEC because the basketball money was so much better. And, that was a long, long time ago. The world has changed. But nobody had a crystal ball. And while I wasn't for that switch into the ACC compared to the SEC, it was well thought out by guys like Bernie Sliger and Hootie Ingram and Bobby Bowden. And it was their choice. I don't want anyone to make any mistake. That was Coach Bowden's choice as much as it was anybody else's. And he thought it gave them a better chance, better path to the to the NCAA championship. So long story short, what I'm saying is all of those things are consideration. I've heard people say, oh, you can break this contract because there's no consideration. Every bit of that is consideration. Every year, the ACC wrote us a check for X dollars. Every year, we got a schedule that gave us a game against Clemson at home every other year and against NC State. Even though we wish they were SEC teams, right? I mean, they're better than what the alternative might have been if we had not joined a conference. So, do I wish we could be an independent? Absolutely. Love to be in Notre Dame's shoes. Love to be in the SEC or the Big Ten, but we are where we are, and we got to find a way to win in this conference in football. I particularly. I was talking, Bob, the other day at lunch with a couple of retired coaches and from other sports, and their opinion was what you're going to see happen with this discrepancy in revenue is that the programs that will be affected won't be football. Michael Alford's going to make sure football has what it needs to eat. But how's he going to find that money? Well, one, he's going to have to take it away from non-revenue sports, right?
Agreed.
That's those coaches' feeling based upon 30 years of coaching experience. And the other thing he's going to do is he's going to have to come to us and say, if we want to compete, we're going to have to look to private donations to give football every resource it needs. Those are the realities. And I don't like either one of them, but those are the realities. And I'm sure Michael likes them far less than I.
Right, right.
Because we as part of our culture at Florida State and part of the culture of the ACC is to be in the top 10 of the Directors' Cup, to have great sports in addition to football and basketball. And it'd be a hard pill to swallow for our fan base to start seeing sports like soccer, softball, not being able to retain coaches and maintain facilities. But that's why when he said we cannot compete, when they said at that board meeting, we cannot compete if we're making $30 million less than the SEC and Big Ten, those were very bold statements. And I guarantee you, every college coach in this country recorded those quotes and will play them for recruits. And so Alford and, Peter Collins and the people on our board, they must be very confident they have an answer. Because to make that statement publicly, there is an unintended consequence to it.
Right. Well, hey, let's wrap up here, and Jerry, I'll ask you a theoretical question as we kind of close up. If you are granted 1 hour with Jim Phillips, you have 1 hour, dinner, drinks, you can sit down and have his ear, be his advisor, explain your years of experience with Seminole Boosters, and as a fan, as a writer, publisher, you can say to Jim Phillips whatever you want as far as your experiences or what he might be able to do. How would you advise him?
Well, the first thing I'd say to you is there would be no 1 hour dinner with Phillips if drinks are involved. I mean, he's an Irishman, right? So, but
and you don't do 1 hour dinners either, but that's beside the point.
I can't even do a 1 hour podcast. But no, honestly, listen, that guy really knows the business. I mean, he knows it as a student athlete. He knows it as a athletic director. He has kids that are, athletes, student athletes. He knows the experience. Right. And I wouldn't be so presumptuous as to say that I could say anything to him that he doesn't already know. But we could have a good conversation about some mutual interests. And I'd be asking him a lot about the dynamic with ESPN and the television networks. I'd be asking him about these streaming services. 2 years ago, we thought that might be the ticket. And boy, they just crushed the Pac-12 recently. So it really comes back to the networks again. And I'd be curious to know his feelings about that. The things, my experience with being at the Boosters and raising money and selling tickets and games is you need good opponents. You really do. Our fans want to have good home games. That's the biggest thing. And when we get Clemson in Florida, that season ticket that year outsells the other one, the year where we have Miami and like NC State and Louisville, I think. Right. It outsells it by 3,000 to 5,000 a year. It goes up, goes back down, goes up, goes back down. And when a year that we pulled in Oklahoma in here, that was a sellout year. If you can have a third grade home game in a year, our fans who have to come from so far away, they're going to spend the money to do it. But then that would be the big thing I would say to him. I really would have liked to see the ACC form sort of a partnership with the Big 12 back in the day, and have it's two conferences, but we have an exchange of games, home and away, with that conference. So 1 year you get Texas, next year you get maybe Baylor, following year you get Texas Tech. It would have given our home schedule stability. And when you look at like our season ticket sales here at Florida State, and this is true because when I was involved, ran that ticket priority policy, I'd go down to the University of Florida and talk to them, find out what they're doing. NC State, Clemson. I spent a lot of time at Clemson, and we're all the same in that respect. And that's what I would say to them is you got to help these schools get put an emphasis on those kind of games. Now, maybe that's a way to incentivize with earned income. Is if you put a game together like that on your home field or even at a neutral site, you share a bigger piece of the revenue because it benefits ESPN and it benefits the ACC. Pay us. And it's good for our fan bases. If you want to make ACC football relevant, feed your fan base a better diet of opponents. That would probably be my number one thing I would emphasize, because I just firmly believe in that. Every survey I've read and did, it's all about, I love Florida State, but I want to see them play, a traditional rival, even when we played Michigan State here in Doak, Andre Rison in that game, that was a kind of a big deal for our fans because Michigan State is somebody, and that would be it. Sorry to be long-winded on that, but
no, I think it's a good point because the fans make the long trip, as you've said. Was it 70% of Florida State season ticket holders are coming 150 or more miles? I might be slightly off on
no, you're
that.
right.
Yeah, so it is a huge consideration. I think have to say we appreciate David Coburn for making that schedule down the road, home and home with Georgia, home and home with Alabama. Of course, the LSU deal is neutral, but still some good revenue on those neutral games between New Orleans and
look
Orlando.
at the exposure. Look at the exposure it gave the ACC.
Right.
And we beat them. How good is that for the ACC? I mean, there ought to be a bonus for that. And so those are the kinds of things I think that are layups. Because, and I don't know, Bob, you and I talked about this off air, but one of the questions I would ask Phillips, to your point, is how do you make a change? Is it a vote of the membership? If you wanted to go to that, look, if you go ahead and play a big game, we're gonna bonus you. Something that draws more eyeballs. We're gonna bonus you based upon the uptick in eyeballs, or just sweeten the pot. But how do you go about that? What's the process? Is it an 8-vote process, or does the ACC commissioner have any latitude to make a decision without a vote of 8 people? I don't know, but those would be a couple of the questions I'd ask him.
Lots of questions moving forward. Again, Jim Phillips has not talked as of yet since the comments by Michael Alford, Clemson's AD, last Friday. It's possible Jim Phillips will comment at one of these basketball tournaments, women's tournament this week, starting Wednesday, men's tournament next week. Often John Swofford often did a state of the conference or a quick presser. We'll see if Jim Phillips says anything or does a sit down with some of the local media up there. So lots for us to kind of monitor in these weeks and months ahead. As I kind of said to start this, it is one of our favorite sports. The business of college athletics is something that seems like there's always something percolating, and whether it's very hot or simmering, there's always something going.
Always something. Yeah, and we didn't even mention NIL.
That's on another show, Jerry. Another show. We're pulling this one in under 1 hour, folks. We are pulling one into the garage, 53 minutes and change.
And there was no drinks involved either, or dinner. You didn't buy me dinner either.
That's for later. That's for happy hour. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Well, thanks for watching or listening to Seminole Sidelines. If you missed us live, you can go back and watch it on YouTube. You can listen on our podcast channels, Apple, Spotify. Again, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 12:30 p.m. Eastern. Please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Listen on Apple, Spotify, wherever you kind of, however you digest your podcast. Check us out there. We'll have great guests throughout these weeks. And obviously lots to talk about with spring football coming up too with the guys. So for Osceola publisher Jerry Kutz, I'm Bob Ferrante. We'll see you again on the Osceola.com. Check us out 24/7 there. And we'll see you Friday afternoon.
And thank you all for listening and for subscribing to the Osceola. We appreciate every one of you.
Very good. Thank you.